Welcome back everyone to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and on today's episode, let's talk about how you choose the right suspension setup for your vehicle. So I've just spent the last 3 days installing entirely new suspension on my Jeep Gladiator, and I could show you what I did. I could tell you all about why I think mine is the best, but that would be crazy, because you don't have the same vehicle as me, you don't have the same needs as me. So in reality, this suspension, it's not the best for you, it's the best for me. So what's really gonna help you is the criteria that I used to choose this suspension. Why did I pick this one from the many options that are available? So if you're interested in learning about how I choose the suspension setup that's going to best meet my needs, stick around, let's get into all the details right now. So when it comes to choosing suspension for your vehicle, there are so many different options, it can be really overwhelming. But I do think there's one criteria that really stands out as the one that you should focus on and the one that is more important than all of the others. And that is the weight carrying capacity of the suspension setup you're looking at. And so it's all well and good to go out and buy a system that says it's a 3-inch lift or it's a 4-inch lift, but that actually is not the most important criteria when you're an overlander. Because as overlanders, we're loading our vehicles up, fridges, extra fuel, food, clothes, camping gear, a rooftop tent, all of those things add weight to the vehicle. And after all, the suspension is designed and needs to carry all of that weight. So more than anything else, you need to look at what is the weight carrying capacity for the suspension that you're interested in. And to even know if it's adequate or appropriate, you obviously need to know the weight of your vehicle. And that's why I've been saying for years, suspension should not be the first thing that you modify or add to your vehicle. It should always be the last thing. And that's why I've left it to last on my vehicle. So you might remember way back when I bought the Gladiator, it had about 100 miles on it. Dad and I took it to the weigh scale and we threw it on the scales and I got an exact measurement of how much it weighed. Since then, there've obviously been a lot of changes. I took out a bunch of weight and of course I've added a bunch of weight. So I need to know what it weighs. So Dad and I took it to the exact same scales. We were both sitting in it again. I had the fuel loaded, all the food, all the water, all the camping gear we take. And on the scales, this thing weighs right on 3,000 kilograms, which is 6,700 pounds, which here in Australia, that is exactly the GVWR of this, the maximum weight that is allowed to be. So yes, my Gladiator is heavy. That is significantly heavier than the Jeep that I drove around Africa. Of course, it's a much bigger vehicle. I'm carrying more fuel, I'm carrying more water, all of that kind of stuff. It also, as a side note, it really reaffirms my decision to go with the lightweight canvas canopy, the lightweight solar panel, the smaller 50 amp hour auxiliary battery. All of those decisions resulted in less weight. And if I hadn't made those decisions, this thing would be over its legal weight limit right now. So going lightweight was the right choice. But more importantly now, I have a baseline and I know how much the vehicle weighs. So when I went out and I started looking for different brands and different setups of suspension, I immediately started probing and saying, what weight is that suspension designed to carry? And to be honest with you, quite a few of the brands that are really well known in the Jeep industry, they don't even tell you or they don't even know. Even when I reached out to them and I contacted them, they said, what are you talking about? It's a 3-inch lift. So in my opinion, if a suspension company can't even tell you the weight that it is designed to carry, that suspension is probably not designed for long-term overlanding. That's maybe more of a rock crawling setup or something like that. That is all well and good, and that's a great exercise to go and do if you love rock crawling. But for my needs, for what I'm doing, it's all about carrying weight. If you're looking at going up to Alaska, if you're gonna go down the Pan American Highway, don't concentrate on the overall height. I really think that's something that, got taken from the off-road industry, but really, and especially here in Australia, people know it's much more about the weight that the suspension is designed to carry. And a good company, they're gonna offer you multiple different options. So Dobinson's here in Australia, King Springs, the AEV, these companies now, they have the standard load spring that's rated from, let's say, 0 to 400 pounds. Then they have the heavy load spring, which is like 400 to 700 pounds. Then they'll even have extra heavy load springs. And if you want to get really crazy, there are companies like Dobinson's, they will make you a custom spring designed for your weight. So before everything else, my advice, have a look at the weight rating and find out how much your vehicle weighs and then match it up so that it's going to handle really well. The next criteria that I think is really important to look at is to get an appropriate suspension setup for your needs and how you plan to use the vehicle. So you guys know me, I'm not a crazy rock crawler. That's not how I use my vehicles. So if I'm buying a suspension that specifically has rock crawler in the name or is designed for rock crawling, then I think it's safe to say that I'm buying the wrong suspension, and that's not for me and that doesn't meet my needs. Of course, the same is true if you do love rock crawling and you end up buying one that's for overlanding. Then again, I think you see pretty quickly there's a conflict there and that doesn't really work out. And I feel like that extends into the details as well, and you have to be careful and really focus on the small things. Another really great example is lots of companies now that have the really high-end Baja inspired suspensions. So they've got external reservoir shocks, they've got adjustable everything, they've got all kinds of triple bypass shocks and kind of bits that bolt on to bits that bolt on to bits that bolt on. And in my opinion, do I need that for the type of remote travel that I like doing? No, I definitely don't. What I need is tried and trusted shocks that work. No complicated extras, no external reservoirs that might leak or might need adjusting or might need bleeding or any of those complications. I need simple, I need durable, I need tough, and it works. So that's the kind of package that I'm looking at. I don't get lured into buying the highest of the high end where I could go and drive Baja at 150 miles an hour and, you know, float over the massive corrugations. That's not the kind of driving that I enjoy doing. It's not the kind of driving I'm going to do. So buying a suspension that's capable of doing that doesn't make any sense. So make sure that when you're looking at a package, you're looking at one that is appropriate for your needs and the uses that you're going to do. Another criteria that really you need to think about that I think a lot of people overlook is what are the legalities in the places that you're thinking of going to? If you genuinely want to drive the Pan American Highway, I think it's important to be careful not to make your vehicle illegal. And this is a long-standing debate in the global traveler community. Does your vehicle actually need to comply with local laws if you're just a tourist and you're just passing through? And I think it's debatable, and I think it depends on the country. Some countries are going to be really strict and they will put your vehicle off the road. Other countries might turn a blind eye, but probably most countries, the police are going to give you a lot of attention. So the Jeep that I drove around Africa, if I had had 37-inch tires on that and a 4.5-inch lift, which is pretty common for a Jeep Wrangler in the US, lots of people do that, that would have attracted an enormous amount of attention from the police. And most of that is going to be corrupt police. They're going to be asking for money. They're going to want bribes. They're potentially even just going to say when I'm at the border, no, this vehicle's illegal, but if you give me $500, I'll let you in. If not, your trip's over and you're done and you can't even ship it home from here. So, you know, thinking about what's actually legal is very important if you genuinely dream about traveling around the world. And that's something I really had to take into consideration here in Australia. Massive lifts, they are just illegal. I would not be allowed to drive it on the road. And Australia has different laws kind of in every single state, and it gets really complicated and confusing. You could potentially raise this thing, let's say 4 inches and put 35-inch tires on it, like many people do in the US. You could go and get that engineered. You could pay maybe $5,000. An engineer will sign off on it and say, yes, the vehicle still performs acceptably, you know, under these safety conditions and emergency braking, and it won't roll over and all of that. You can pay, get it all certified. Then you have this special certificate. And when the police pull you over, make no mistake about it, they will pull you over. You show them this special certificate, it's been engineered, it's been signed off. Okay, then that's okay, you're allowed to drive it. The catch is that engineering certificate, it only applies to one state. I'm planning on driving to every state in Australia. If I then go drive it into a different state, the police pull me over, they say, this is ridiculous. I say, oh, it's been engineered. They'll say, that doesn't apply in this state. It has to pass all of this state's criteria, so you'd have to get it re-engineered. But obviously that's cost prohibitive, that's time prohibitive. You can see it just turns into a ginormous nightmare. So for what I want to do, travel is my focus. If I want to travel all of Australia, I can't have a 4-inch lift, I can't have 37-inch tires, so be it. I would rather go traveling with a Jeep like this one than not go traveling at all. So again, really think about what are the legalities of where you're going, and chances are keeping your vehicle more modest and closest to stock is going to fly under the radar a lot more with the authorities, and you'll have a lot less friction on your trip. And then the final thing that I really think you should concentrate on if you're buying a brand new suspension setup is how comprehensive is the kit that you're looking at. And I think, again, this is a bit of a holdover from the 80s or a bit of a holdover from the off-road industry. It used to be really common. You could just slap some longer springs in your solid axle vehicle and call it good and then go off-roading and have a great weekend. And I think maybe that's true of vehicles back in the day. And let's face it, those vehicles didn't really drive very well on road anyway. So doing that to them, you didn't really notice a big difference. These days, the story is totally different. I mean, this Jeep here, it has electronic stability control, it has traction control, it has ABS, it has actually automatic emergency braking, it has lane monitoring, it has all kinds of electric systems that are making it smoother and nicer to drive on the road, and they're keeping me safe at the same time. So what that means is, if you compromise the vehicle by just raising the center of gravity with huge big springs, there's a whole bunch of extra stuff that you haven't adjusted, and you're going to make it drive much, much worse on the road. So the best example I have of this, a friend who has a really new Jeep, he threw a huge lift in it and, thought it was done and would drive it around. Every time you went around a corner with a decent amount of speed, all of the traction control and stability control on the dash would light up, the computer would freak out, and it would even apply the brakes as you were going around the corner. For me, that's just not acceptable. That's terrible, and I'm not interested in buying any kind of suspension kit that is that badly thought out, or that kind of slapped together by a company who can like make a big shock and a big spring and then say that's a package. Now, I think that's not really a complete package. Some things you really want to think about on a solid axle vehicle like this, you're going to be extending the sway bar end links as well. You definitely probably need to extend the brake lines. You really want to think about what's happening with the front and rear track bar, because now your axle's not going to be centered anymore. Are you adjusting for that? You might need to think about what's happening with the upper and lower control arms and what's the rotation of the front and the rear axle now, because if you raise the vehicle, you need to change the rotation of the axle. So does your suspension include brackets to handle that, or adjustable control arms? And then of course, there's the electronic side to think about as well. Chances are you're increasing the tire size. Have you thought about the need to reprogram the computer so it knows about those bigger tires? Otherwise your speedo is going to be off, your shift points are going to be off, all of those kinds of things. So there's really a lot to think about and a lot that goes into it. The moose test is the famous one. Drive really fast, swerve like you think you're going to hit a moose, and see what happens. Do you want to drive a vehicle that performs terribly in the moose test? Or do you want to drive a vehicle that drives as well as factory, under those kind of conditions? Because if you're driving tens of thousands of miles, chances are there's going to be some stuff happen and some emergency situations where you are going to slam on the brakes, you are going to swerve, and driving a vehicle that doesn't handle very well, it's downright dangerous, it's not enjoyable. For me, that's not something I'm interested in at all. So again, as I was looking through suspension kits and options, I'm looking for one that's complete, that includes all of that stuff as one package. It's all been tested, it's all been validated, and you know that it all works together in harmony. And it's not the kind of kit where, you do sort of most of the job and then you drive it around for a week and you're like, it still handles really badly. Maybe I'll go out and buy an adjustable track bar. You put that on, then you drive that for a month and you say, it still doesn't handle very well. Maybe I'll go and change out the shocks for some like triple bypass external reservoir ones. Maybe that'll fix it. And and so on and so forth, where you feel like it's just bits and pieces of different kits from different companies. Not interested for me at all. That's not how I want my vehicle to be. So a complete kit, I think, is way more important than any one aspect or kind of flashy feature like 4.5-inch lift, triple bypass shocks. Yeah, those are great numbers to brag, but what are the details about how it actually performs when you're on-road and off-road? So after all of those factors and things to think about, what suspension did I go for on the Gladiator? What I've chosen here is the kit from AEV called their 2.5-inch RT suspension. And I went with this one because it meets all of those criteria that I laid out. This is, I think, the most complete, best engineered suspension available for a Jeep anywhere on the planet. So AEV actually have guys working for them that used to work for Jeep. So when it comes to factory engineering, I think it would be pretty hard to beat what AEV are doing. And they test this up to OEM standards. They crash test them, they safety test them on the track, all the emergency braking situations. It's all thought through and it's all designed to be correct. And as AEV always say, they're never the first to market with new products. They're not the cheapest on the market, but in terms of quality, durability, and testing, I don't think there's any argument. They are the best on the market. And so why did I go with the RT suspension? They actually just last week, they announced their new XP suspension, which comes with remote reservoir, bigger, heavier duty shock absorbers. And I think they would be great. But again, I'm looking for tried and tested durable. I've got here the Bilstein 5100 shocks. These are a monotube shock. It's essentially what I had around Africa, which was flawless for me. What I need is durable day in and day out. Not fancy features, not Baja race speeds, solid, reliable, that's what I've gone for. Of course, there's control arm drop brackets on the front. The mount for the track bar on the rear has been changed. All kinds of well thought out components that make this a complete suspension kit. And then finally, you're gonna ask, what's this on the ground in front of me? I nearly need two hands to pick it up. AEV also just announced they now have heavy load springs. So they have what they call their standard load springs, which is what I have in the Jeep right now. And they say, recommended for weights between 0 and 400 pounds above the stock weight of your vehicle. Then they have these heavy load springs, which they say you should run from between 400 pounds to 700 plus pounds of weight in your vehicle. The other catch is these heavy load springs, they provide a lift of about 3 inches, whereas the ones I have in the Jeep are about 2.5 inches. And so you might say, why aren't I running the heavy load springs? Well, actually I did. I put these in 3 days ago and I drove around for a few days with the heavy load springs. And to be honest with you, for the weight that I have in my Jeep, it was just too much lift. That 3 inches here in Australia is actually illegal. And I think it just made the Jeep too high and not appropriate for, I'm only running 33-inch tires. I'm not interested in having the world's highest Jeep. That'll cause too much attention with the police. So I've actually swapped out. I'm not running the heavy load springs now. I'm running the standard load 2.5-inch springs, and I think they're actually adequate for my needs. Reading around on the forums too, plenty of guys in the US, they've been running these springs with 37-inch tires and well over 7,000 pounds of weight. 7,200, 7,400 seems really common in a Gladiator, and they say these springs handle it just fine. So while maybe it's not AEV's recommended weight, I would suggest that these heavy load springs, these are designed for the people in America that just run ginormous weight on their vehicles. 7,500, 8,000, 8,500 pounds, which is well over gross vehicle weight rating, which is well into illegal territory. I think these springs, would work for that. If I had one of those massive alu cab campers, if I had 37-inch tires, all the steel skid plates, my Jeep would easily weigh 7,500, 8,000 pounds, and these springs would be ideal for that. But for me, for what I'm doing, I'm loving this setup on here right now. On the road, it drives as well as it did stock. I don't even notice it. So far, I've only played a little bit off-road. The articulation is massively increased. I don't even think it's the same vehicle anymore. And I'm pretty sure I've completely eliminated my breakover angle problems where I was scraping the belly going over kind of sharp obstacles. So I'm excited. Dad and I are just about to head out on an adventure to put this new suspension to the test. So I hope that video has been helpful, and I hope it gets you thinking about what you need out of a suspension setup. Really think carefully about how you're going to use your vehicle. Where do you want to go? What kind of loads will you be carrying? Because at the end of the day, those things dictate the suspension you need, not just the brand that some other people in your Jeep club are running or the brand that happens to be on sale that week. That's not the way to go. Make sure you really go back to the fundamentals. What is the suspension doing? How are you going to be using it? And go from there to pick and choose the correct setup for your vehicle and for the types of trips you're taking. So if the video has been helpful, do hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you've got any more questions, leave a comment down below. I'm super happy to help out any way that I can. And if you're interested to get more behind the scenes content, if you want to see GPS track logs from where I'm going around Australia, all of that kind of stuff is available over on Patreon now. There's a link in the description and you can check that out. And now finally, my Jeep build is complete. Well, no, I tell a lie. It's not quite complete. Let's have one more video of all the little fixes and additions and modifications that I'm making this week while I'm at Dad's place, and then the Jeep will be complete. Stick around, that one's coming next week.